Module 5 Colograph. In this video we're going to be looking at found object printing. And here on the table you can see I have a mixture of found objects, and these are just things around the house that I have spare that I can use for inking up and printing. So this loosely falls into Colograph, but these are really fun. So I have some fabric here of all different types which produce different surface patterns. I have a CD, I have some bubble wrap, I have a pom-pom, an eraser, some cotton reels, I have some felt, ribbon, got the pom-pom there, and I also have a big tub of buttons. So I have a mixture of objects that when I place ink onto the top of them, they're going to create different things. Here I have a shoe brush which has got a rubber end. I even have cocktail sticks which I can use. So I have an absolute selection of found objects to start with, to go and have a look around your house and see what you can find. So let's get started with our found object printing. So I begin with a clear desk, and I have my perspex laid out on the desk here in front of me. I'm going to start by using water-based inks, and I've chosen orange ink here to use, and with my palette knife I'm spreading this out so that it's the width of my roller. Using the roller, making sure that it's absolutely clean, I roll down the ink down onto the printing surface. And I just need to roll out a square of ink that is large enough to cover the roller. So we want an even covering, and I move back and forwards. I lift the roller up, place it down several times to create an even coating of ink across the roller. And depending on what you're using as your found object, you may need slightly more or you may need slightly less ink to get the right covering. So here on the roller, an even covering. Now I'm starting by using bubble wrap. And bubble wrap has a lovely texture on the top of it, and I've actually laid it down the bubble side up, and I'm going to transfer the ink from the perspex over and across onto the bubble wrap. And what you can see happening here is the ink is just resting on the surface of the bubbles, so I've got tiny little circles all covered in ink. As you can see, my bubble wrap is larger than the roller, so I'm having to pick the ink up several times and place it over to create an even coating of ink all across the whole of the surface of the bubble wrap itself. There will be several areas that the bubbles have popped that actually won't pick up the ink, but I'm doing my best to give this a lovely coating of ink. And as I said, this is water-based ink, and it's just resting on the top of the surface here to create a lovely pattern and a texture from which we can print from. Okay, so it looks like that's complete. So you can see the ink there rested on the top. Placing that to one side, I'm just going to get myself a piece of printing paper, and I'm going to place the printing paper over and on top of the ink, and that's paper nice side down on top of the bubbles. Now the one thing here to be careful with burnishing is because the bubbles are full of air, if I press too hard they're going to pop and I'm going to lose my print. So I'm pressing down just using the palms of the hands, so I've got a fair pressure, but it's not so much pressure that it's going to ruin the print and it's going to pop all of the bubbles that I've just inked up, because I want to be able to use this again should I want to do a second, third or fourth print. So I'm rubbing the paper and then I gradually peel that back to reveal the print, and we have the image there, and this creates a lovely texture. It's almost like honeycomb or something like that. Okay, so that's our first layer of colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer up more layers of ink using different types of object. So I've chosen a different colour here. I'm using a red ink, and again using a roller I'm spreading this out onto my perspex, which is laid on my table, my printing area. Again, I've got an even covering of ink. I'm taking a CD or a DVD and I'm going to roll the ink out onto the back of the DVD, creating an even covering and coating of the printing ink. Okay, so that's got an even covering there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be layering up the found object printing all onto one print. So rather than printing separate objects onto separate pieces of paper, I'm going to be layering up all on one print just to show you the different marks that you could be making with different things. So there we have our CD covered in ink. And I'm going to place this time this CD face down on top of our bubble wrap print, and I'm making sure that that print is dried before I place the second colour over the top. It's always important to make sure that the first colour is dry before we layer up the second colour, so we don't get into a big muddle and the inks don't mix. I'm pressing pretty firmly down CD onto the paper so that the ink really transfers across, and then I peel up the CD and we have our print there, and you can see the solid red on the outside. Okay, so I'm going to continue. I'm going to try a few different objects now. I've got a cotton reel here, and I'm going to use the roller, pick up some ink and pop it onto the very end of this roll of cotton, which again is another little circular shape. So you can use whatever found objects that you want to within your house that are spare and that you or your household don't mind being covered in ink or being given over to the printmaking that you're doing. And found object printing is really fun, and if you have children, for example, or you teach within a school, sometimes this type of printmaking can be the most accessible in terms of getting people printing and creating patterns from objects very simply without having to use any cutting tools where potentially hands can get cut. So when we do things like lino cut, wood engraving later on in the course, obviously they have fine cutting tools which little fingers can get cut very easily. So this is a really great fun way of printing. And again, you can create whatever design that you want to on your print. I'm doing a tester print here. I'm just trying a few different found objects, inking up, printing to create a design that just illustrates the types of marks that can be made. And with the cotton reel now, instead of actually using the roller and placing the ink from the roller onto the cotton, I'm actually dipping it straight into the ink and picking up and printing. So we don't have to be super formal here with our printing. The main thing is that we're getting something, putting some ink on it somehow, whether you dab it in the ink, roll the ink on, use a sponge, use a paintbrush, but we're just placing the ink onto the print. Okay, so you can see there we've got our cotton roll printed. So it's beginning to look a little bit like a flower. So now I'm going to work with some green, and I've got a pom-pom here that I've created. I have lots of wool lying about my house, so and I'm dabbing it in the ink. And here I've done a little trial bit, and this is sometimes a good thing to do if you're working on a large piece and you're trying out some different marks. You don't want to try this out on your finished print. You want to get a spare piece of paper and try the marks that you're creating onto the spare piece of paper before then placing the ink onto your finished print. So this creates a sort of soft mark here, and I'm dabbing. So I'm picking up the ink with the pom-pom, which is made of yarn, made of wool, dabbing it into the ink and then placing it onto the print. So you can see with each of the found objects I've used a slightly different method for printing. So you can combine all different methods of printing. So whether that's burnishing, hand burnishing properly, whether it's just pressing it down, or whether it's dabbing it here, you can see that I'm being a little bit more free, a little bit more creative with my ink, and simply finding different ways of making marks and transferring ink from the printing surface on our table through a found object and then down onto the printing paper to create a pattern, a shape, a print of my choice. Okay, so I'm just quickly going over the printing there, and then I have my green dots spread across the printing paper. And I'm going to keep going now. I'm going to keep trying a few different additional things to create a few more marks. So again, I've got another little reel of cotton there. It's a tiny paper one, and I'm going to dab, picking up some of the green ink and placing it down onto the ink. And here I am just playing, and it's very important to have a play and set aside some time to create several different prints with collagraph and found objects. You can do them very small, or you can do them large like I'm doing here. And you can even create something once and then try and recreate it a second time if you want to, or play with different colours the second or third time around. So with these collagraphs, these found object prints, they're not necessarily going to be an addition of identical prints, but you may well have some similar prints that you've created in a similar manner. Okay, so I'm still just dabbing these last few bits of ink from that paper cotton reel there. Okay, so for the very final part of this print, I'm going to use this shoe brush, which is a rubber plastic shoe brush that I've never used, so I've dedicated it to my printmaking stash of stuff that I'm going to be printing with. And here again, I'm putting this into the ink, and I'm kind of rubbing it into the ink and then creating a border for the outside edge of my print. Now, within all of these demonstrations, I'm tending to work fairly quickly, because the essence of the demonstration is that you understand the technique, that you can feel confident that you can go away and play with this yourself. This is by no means the only way of found object printing, and all the methods of collagraph within this module as well are by no means the only way that you can do collagraph, and certainly other printmaking teachers might teach you additional ways of working, provide lots of other tips. But this is a starting point. This is an introduction to collagraph, so hopefully you can take away some of these tips, these ideas, and go away, refer to your sketchbooks, and then create some work yourself. So we have our print with our border on the edge. And I think I'll just put one more bit in the middle, so I'm using a little roll of sellotape. I'm going to dab it in the green ink and then just sort of move the sellotape in a circular motion to create a circle in the centre, just to strengthen that central element of the print. And I'm just moving it around again just to sort of dilute the ink out to spread it out. Okay, and that's the final thing I'm going to be doing on this print. And so here you can see all the different marks, all the different colours layered up. And here's our final print. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit closer so you can see some of the marks in a bit more detail. And with collagraph you can layer up lots of colours to create detailed print. You can see some of the marks there on the bubble wrap. They're beautiful marks, they're really lovely. And you can work with whatever colours you want. You can blend the colours, you can layer up, and you can really have fun creating some really brilliant images and shapes and textures and patterns with your collagraph. So I wish you luck.